The productivity isn't the problem. The productivity is the solution, just not to the problem you think it is. And once you understand what it's actually solving, once you can see the mechanism underneath the motion, the whole thing looks completely different. This video isn't about doing less. It isn't going to tell you to put the phone down and go for a walk. If you're here, you've probably already heard that. You've nodded along and then returned to exactly what you were doing. Because the doing isn't something you choose. Not really. It's something that happens reliably, automatically, the moment the stillness gets too close. What this video is going to do is something different. It's going to show you what the stillness is keeping at bay, and why understanding that, not managing it, not optimizing it, just understanding it, is the only thing that has ever actually changed anything. So let's start with something most people carry without ever examining it directly. There is a story most high-performing people carry about themselves. It goes something like this. I am someone who works hard because I care. Because I have standards. Because this is who I am. And that story isn't wrong exactly. The caring is real, the standards are real. But the story is incomplete, and the part it leaves out is the part that's running everything. Here's what the story doesn't account for. The fact that the productivity doesn't feel like a choice. Real ambition has an off switch. Real drive has a resting state. You can want something deeply and also put it down for the evening. You can care about your work and also leave it at the desk. But this, what most people in this space are actually experiencing, doesn't have an off switch. The moment the laptop closes, something else opens. A low hum of anxiety. A list assembling itself in the background. This specific restlessness that passes for productivity but feels, if you're honest about it, less like drive and more like something you can't quite stop doing. That's not ambition. That's a nervous system doing what it was trained to do. And the training, the real question, is where it came from. Because it didn't come from nowhere, it came from somewhere. And most people who work the way you work have never actually looked at where. The standard story about the driven person skips right over that part. It starts at the achievement and works backward to the discipline. It never asks what the discipline was originally protecting. That's the myth. And it's worth destroying carefully and with some honesty, because the thing underneath it is not what most people expect to find. Which brings us to something that probably happened a long time ago. At some point, probably long before the career, long before the metrics and the deliverables, stillness started to feel dangerous. Not dangerous in any dramatic sense, just unsafe. Like something could happen in the quiet that wouldn't happen as long as you stayed in motion. Maybe the motion kept the peace in a house that wasn't always peaceful. Maybe being useful was the condition under which you felt secure. Maybe you learned very early that achievement was the language in which you were most legibly loved. It doesn't have to be a dramatic origin. Most of the time, it isn't. It's just a pattern that was reinforced, quietly, consistently, until the nervous system filed it under. This is how you survive. And nervous systems are faithful. They don't update automatically. They keep running the programs that kept you safe long after the original threat has dissolved. This is what polyvagal research keeps showing us, that the body doesn't distinguish between the threat that was real then and the environment that is safe now. It just keeps doing what it learned to do. Efficiently. Automatically. Without consulting you. So when the email comes in at 9 p.m. and the hand reaches for the phone, that isn't ambition. That's a learned response running on a very old track. When the weekend arrives and the restlessness arrives with it, that isn't drive. That's a nervous system doing what it was trained to do when the alternative felt like exposure. And here's what changes when you understand this. The behavior stops being evidence of who you are and starts being evidence of what you learned. Those are not the same thing. One is fixed. One is not. One is identity. One is a response pattern. And a response pattern, unlike a character trait, can be seen, named, and over time, interrupted. That's not a small distinction. That's actually the entire difference between spending another 5 years in the same loop and finding a door that wasn't visible before. But before the door, before any of that, there's something that has to be seen clearly. Because the cost of running this program doesn't stay inside the work. It never has. And now we get to the part that matters most. Here's what the survival loop produces over time. Not just the exhaustion, though that's real. And it's the kind of exhaustion that follows you into the weekend and sits with you while you're supposed to be off. Not just the restlessness, though that's real too. What it produces, specifically, is distance. Distance from the people in the room. Distance from the work itself. The hollowness after a project lands, where the feeling was supposed to be, and there is no feeling. Distance from the version of yourself that existed before the performance became the point. This is the part of the survival response that the original training didn't account for. It was designed to keep you safe. And for a long time, it did. But a guard dog that never rests eventually stops knowing what it's guarding. It's just guarding against everything, all the time, including the things that would actually be good to let in. So what is the productivity actually solving? Not the career objectives, not the deliverables. It's solving for the anxiety that surfaces when the motion stops. It's keeping the quiet at a manageable distance. It's running a protection strategy against a threat that, for most people reading this, hasn't been real for a very long time. And here's what makes this genuinely difficult. Not a character flaw, not a discipline problem, genuinely difficult. The protection strategy works. In the short term, the doing quiets the anxiety. The task completed produces a moment of stillness that the stillness alone never could. The system is internally consistent. The loop closes every time. That's why it runs. That's why every attempt to simply stop has lasted about 2 weeks before the old current pulled you back. You weren't weak. You were running a system that was designed to be self-reinforcing. And the cost of that system, the relationships that got the leftover version of you, the body that's been carrying the vigilance for years, the quiet grief of watching your own life from a slight remove. That cost is real. You've already paid it. And naming what you paid it for is not the same as regretting it. It's actually the first thing that makes any of this movable. If something in this section landed, if the question of what you've been protecting yourself from feels like something worth actually examining, there's a resource in the description built exactly for that step. It's a 5-day journaling process designed to begin separating who you are from what you've been producing. Not a life overhaul, not a new system to optimize, just a structured way to start looking at the motor beneath the motion. The link is in the description. Now, here's what shifts when you actually understand this pattern. Knowing this doesn't fix it overnight. That's worth saying plainly. The nervous system doesn't update because you watched a video. The loop doesn't dissolve on understanding alone, but something does change. And the change is specific enough to be worth naming. Before this frame, the question was, how do I manage the productivity better? How do I rest more efficiently? How do I add a recovery protocol that keeps the output sustainable? After this frame, the question is different. It becomes, what was I protecting myself from? And is that thing still real? And what would it actually mean to stop guarding against it? Those are not the same question. The first one is a productivity problem. The second one is an identity question. And this channel exists because millions of people have been trying to solve an identity question with a productivity answer. And it doesn't work. It never worked. Because the exhaustion isn't a scheduling problem. It's a worth problem. And worth doesn't respond to better time blocking. Now, the real constraints are real. The mortgage is real. The team is real. The obligations that don't pause for self-examination are real. This is not a video that's going to tell you to quit. Most people aren't going to quit. And most people don't need to. What changes first isn't external. It's the relationship to the loop itself. The moment you can see the loop, really see it, name it, trace it back to what it was originally for, it loses a small amount of its automatic authority. Not all of it. A small amount. And small amounts, compounded over time, are not nothing. The person who is capable of being in the room, not just physically in the room, but actually present, actually available, that person is not someone you have to become from scratch. That person is already there. They've been very quiet. They've been waiting inside the schedule for a little room to exist. What they need isn't a different calendar. What they need is for the guard dog to learn that the threat it's been running from is no longer at the door. That's the work, not another productivity system. That specific work. And it starts not with doing less, but with understanding what the doing has been for. If you want to take that question further than a single video can go, the 5-day process in the description is where the examination begins. Not another thing to add to the list, something to set down. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. When did you first notice that stopping felt harder than continuing? And what did you tell yourself that feeling meant about you? So here's what this video has actually been about. Not productivity, not hustle culture, not a set of behaviors to fix. It's been about a question most high-performing people have never been given permission to ask. What if the thing driving you isn't ambition? What if it's something older than the career? Something the nervous system learned when the stakes were genuinely different and the stillness genuinely wasn't safe. That reframe doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't require you to become someone else. It doesn't demand a transformation your actual life has no room for. It just asks you to consider the possibility that the exhaustion is a rational response to a system you've been running for a very long time. A system that made sense once, that served you once, and that is now costing more than it returns. The guard dog has been faithful. It has been running the same patrol for years, and it is exhausted. And the threat it's been watching for is not at the door anymore. You've already paid for this knowledge. The years of the loop, the relationships that got the leftover version, the body carrying the vigilance, the quiet and specific grief of being almost present but never quite there. That's not just a cost. That's information. Your actual self, trying to get your attention through the only language it had left. The exhaustion isn't evidence you're failing. The numbness isn't evidence you're broken. They're evidence that you've been running a protection strategy against something that no longer requires protection. That's not a character flaw. That's a rational response to an irrational system. And a rational response, once it's seen clearly, can be answered differently. Not all at once. Not without the real constraints that are genuinely real. But differently. That's actually where it starts. And you already know something now that you didn't know when you clicked. That's not nothing.